Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for our members and guests on the West Coast. I'm Tom Skura. I'm the Vice President of Content and Programs for the Cybersecurity Collaborative, and I want to welcome you all today to participate in our Best Practices for Effective Incident Management session. There is a lot of material in this deck. We wanted to make sure that we covered quite a bit of the topic. The deck will be available to all members and guests upon request. There'll be a way that you can kind of connect with us to get it. And I just wanted to mention, obviously, this is if you have cybersecurity certifications, this counts for one CPE. The questions, please, if you have, put in the Q&A box. Some of our panelists will moderate them during the sessions. We'll get to them as many as we can to the end. I'm going to introduce Nicole Darden-Ford, who is our executive sponsor for the collaborative. She's the CISO of Rockwell Automation. She comes with a tremendous amount of experience. She's had 20 plus years of success in the corporate sector and the federal government, including working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's no small feat. So we're delighted to not only have her here in a little bit. She'll introduce the team and the team concept, but as a member of our executive committee, she helps steer the activities and make sure that members are getting their needs met. So again, welcome. And I'm very fortunate to have here 4 team panelists today. I'll start by introducing Michelle Amonte. She's a cybersecurity analyst for DuPage County, Illinois, a great contributor to the team in terms of many, many good best practices. Secondarily, I'll introduce Paul Vivian, who's the Director of Information Security at Kirkland & Ellis. It's a major international law firm, and I have to say a great contributor, like the others here. Rockwell has contributed as well to collaborative activities, including providing useful content, some of it legally based, to help all members. And then I'd like to introduce Corey Johnson, who's the Director of Cybersecurity for 2U. Corey has been on a number of teams and has provided significant best practice guidance from 2U, so we're appreciative to have him there. And last but not least, Tiffany Watkins, who's the Associate Director of Cybersecurity for OneMain Financial. Tiffany, we had the pleasure of having Tiffany really present how she manages and presents metrics around this, so she may talk a little bit about this when we get to that sections. The big thing I want to say is, kudos to Rockwell, DuPage, Kirkland & Ellis, 2U, and OneMain Financial for their support to not only this team, but all the teams, and their mission to really help other members in the collaborative. We're a collaborative organization. We believe we can have benefit by sharing what we know, the best practices, and discussing our problems. Certainly all the firms represented here have not only done it on this team, but throughout the life and history of the Cybersecurity Collaborative. What I'd like to do just briefly is for all our guests who are not familiar with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, just want to talk to you a little bit about the benefits and why you should consider joining. As I mentioned, we're a collaborative organization. It's for the benefit of its members. We're vendor agnostic. We do talk about vendor tools, but we're not being paid by anyone in your organization to adopt their best practices or promote their tools. I also want to point out number 2, when members come in, they kind of say, well, sounds to me like I'm have to pay to contribute a lot. It's really up to you to do it. And members end up wanting to do that because they see the value of it. But this benefits both the CISO and the CISO staff. From the CISO standpoint, the daily morning security report and the staff too apprises you of any major events and threats. So when you walk in the office and board member asks you, well, did you hear about such and such happening? It's covered before we even get to the office. But importantly, too, we have 2 pieces of collateral. And for members interested in reaching out to us, we can share some of these with you. One is we put together a CISO's quick guide to the boardroom, sort of to get you prepared. It's only about 12 to 15 pages. Key points on how to prepare for board presentations, what they're looking for, what content is needed. And another one I'll talk about is with regard to the current SEC regulation. For your staff, they participate on these teams, and they also get the benefit of the experience of other members to develop their programs, whether it's application security, incident management, or any of the disciplines. Again, we're vendor agnostic. We believe we can each help each other, and we collaborate both on these teams and outside of these teams. So today, what we'll talk about briefly, the background of this task force, the deliverables we produced. I think we understand the importance of incident management, but why it's becoming more important than ever and how it's evolving. We'd like to present our framework for effective incident management program. It isn't about just a plan. It's about all the other components that go into making that plan successful. And we'd like to leave you with that concept. And then we're going to talk about specific guidance on those framework components. We'll summarize 5 key takeaways. We have some FAQs that's in our guidance document. If we get to them today, we'll discuss them. If not, they're in our document. We'll talk a little bit about what other task forces we're doing and planning to do, and then we'll conclude with a Q&A. So as I mentioned before, the background, we're organizations representing different industries and government agencies. I think it's important, and I think all members will agree, that they get a lot of value out of other companies that aren't just in their industry. Now, naturally, there are some regulations that come into play, but some of the best practices can transfer into the organizations. And we found, too, great benefit from Michelle's organization and other government organizations that really are under state and federal mandates to have good cybersecurity programs, share their best practices with us, and they're very valuable and valid to members in industry. We share our successes, false starts, and challenges, including the failures we had. We talk about them, but what we learned from them. And we do this all under an NDA. And there's value from collaboration as much as from the deliverables. Each team produces the deliverables, but a lot of it, the value is collaborating during these team meetings and then even offline. Even Paul was telling me about that. So with that, we have a number of task force members here and those that were on the task force. I'm just going to turn it over to Nicole just to say a few words about the collaborative and the concepts of the task force, if you would, Nicole. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon and welcome to our Incident Management Task Force briefing. My name is Nicole Ford and I serve as the member of the Executive Committee of the Cybersecurity Collaborative. And I am really excited about today's session. Incident management is a core capability that we can all continuously learn and improve. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few words on the value of what we do here. These task force briefings are a great way to gain valuable insights on specific security topics from CISOs. As the CISO for Rockwell Automation, I know we value the Cybersecurity Collaborative as an excellent source of trusted cybersecurity counsel from fellow CISO peers. As Cybersecurity Collaborative members, we share our successes, challenges on a wide range of security topics. We are able to do this in an open and confidential environment, and that is extremely important. What you will hear today is based on the input from respected CISOs. They meet for about 8 weeks to discuss specific topic of interest. In this case, it's incident management, and then prepare guidance documents that they feel will benefit all members. During our task force sessions, we invite you to share your tools, metrics, presentations, and documents, and any other lessons learned that you may feel will be helpful to others. It's our hope that even between sessions, you may leverage the connections you make as a part of the Cybersecurity Collaborative to call on a few fellow members when help is needed. I want to thank all of the members of the Incident Management Task Force for their contributions. to create the guidance documents, the metrics, and the incident response plan template that we're going to provide. We all look forward to a great discussion this afternoon. Now I hand it back to Tom.
Nicole, well said, and thank you for your leadership and all the value that Rockwell Automation has provided over the many years. We greatly appreciate it. So task force deliverables are for the value of, for the benefit of members only. And we usually produce something, one or two things out of every task force. Typically as a guidance document, which summarizes all the discussions we've had over the course of the 8 weeks. In this case, we have a relatively long and detailed one. You'll see parts of that as we present today. That will be available for members in its edited draft form. And we also ask members if they want to comment on it or any of the questions, and then we put it into final product form a little bit after that. One of the things we have that's been provided by a member is an actual incident response template. Now, there are many ways you can do this and cut it, but I will say, and this was presented, this is a really solid way to kind of codify your incident response plan in terms of all the required things. And we'll talk a little bit about best practices within that, because these things can tend to be long and then you worry about playbooks on top of that, but we have some good guidance in that. And the third thing that we have is we're developing a security metrics workbook, and every task force contributes examples of metrics it uses in the management of whatever program we're talking about. So we will talk today a little bit about some ways you can measure the effectiveness of the program and find ways to improve it. But the metrics workbook is actually a working workbook. You can actually put data in it, and it's in Excel, but we're looking to actually move those capabilities to a platform toward the end of the year. So what's going on? More threats, more incidents. Cisco report says continuously more complex multi-stage attacks involving multiple threat types. Well, it's not surprising. 3% of companies in 2017, according to the Verizon Data Breach Approach, were impacted by ransomware. It's over 20% now in 2021. It's not gone away. It's become more complex. We've actually had a whole team regarding this. The second thing is regulatory pressures. The New York State financial regulations is an example for financial firms. But there's the SEC proposed regulation that may be adopted in the fall. We were fortunate to have Kirk Nahar from WilmerHale give a boardroom presentation. This is a benefit for CISOs, by the way, on what you need to do to prepare. And from that presentation, our content team put together a 2-page solid document that really talks about what you're required to do from an incident response perspective, meaning is it material, new incidents, updates on incidents, and obviously if there are multiple incidents that collectively come together, they have to be reported too. On top of that, you got to report your information about your program and competence from your management and also from your board as well. It's a 2-page document. It's available right now for all members. If you're interested in getting it, I'd say at the end of this, again, I want you to, you'll have to contact our organization, and I'm sure we can arrange to talk our people into giving it to you. It's really helpful and a benefit for CISOs. The other thing is it's an expanding scope we're talking about. Third parties, and we've actually had a task force talking about the incident management aspects of that. We won't dwell on that today. Log4j, SolarWinds, OT, IoT. So obviously it is a expanding, moving target. So how do you get your hands around it? The way we look at it is there really 3 tiers. And this is a model we're going to be using to talk about some of the best practices today. The lowest tier is support, and it is important. It sounds like, okay, it's the same old thing, executive support, resources, stakeholders, and support tools. Yeah, I know. However, it's very easy sometimes, when resources get cut, to think that the incident response team, where you may have dedicated people, well, you're not really working on incidents, so why don't you go over and manage some other aspect? It's like asking a fire department to, go over and run the recycling organization. It's just, you lose touch and you lose the expertise and training by not focusing on it. So executive support, we'll talk about that. Stakeholders, again, it's not just the responsibility of security and the incident response team within security, it's pervasive through other organizations. And you have to have some tools, you know, to call people together to track incidents, et cetera. At the center of this are the processes. And that's really the incident response plan. You know, how am I going to respond? What do I need to do? How am I going to identify, contain, and resolve the incident? And then playbooks. We'll talk a little bit about playbooks because incident response plans used to get so complicated, they were no longer workable. So folks have migrated to playbooks, but even then it can be complicated. We have some good tips on how you can construct those. And members talk about actually putting together a communications plan. That can be within your incident response plan, but because it's important to make sure the communications to executives on status are done without taking away the time to actually resolve the incident, it is extremely important to do that. At the top of this sits operational effectiveness. Testing and training are an absolute must. If you're not testing and training this, and not just annually like PCI requests, you really should be doing this quarterly and more often. You're not going to improve it. And when it comes time to an incident, you may be fumbling a little bit more. And metrics are ways of analyzing sort of the effectiveness of the program. We'll talk about it. And then using the operational effectiveness programs, you can drive improvement in terms of the support and processes. So there are a lot of moving parts to this. We're not just focusing on the incident response plan. Very, very important. You have to have it, but you really need to have these other things in play to make this effective. So let me talk about executive support requirements. The importance has to be of the program. They have to understand that. And remember that this is tied to the continuity of the business, the reputation, and legal and regulatory requirements. I think they might recognize it, but they might not recognize their importance in what you're doing, and you need to do that. And secondly, it's a shared accountability. You know, business units and others have to participate in resolving an incident and dealing with its aftermath. So if someone says, oh, it's really the responsibility of the security team, you can't do it alone. And it's very important that executives understand that. Empowerment and immunity. Executives have to empower teams to make choices, including those that are very, very disruptive. So you may shut down network segments, and you should be empowered to do that. The immunity side is if you shut down something that in retrospect you didn't have to, that's okay because you were trying to make the right decision. I've actually been in that situation and it had a lot of regulatory results when I was at Verizon, but we had to make decisions and decisions made under uncertainty. It's very important that they understand that. And there's some ways to do that to get them to understand their participation. Yes, they have to be aware of what's going on, but clearly in ransomware, they have to be involved in the pay no pay decisions. And we've had a team on that. And program oversight in terms of reviewing its effectiveness, ensuring you're resolving any issues. Our guidance here, and I'll ask if any member wants to chime in very briefly, I know we have a lot to cover, to increase executive engagement. One thing you could do is you could say, hey, we're going to institute an incident management program improvement project. You might want to call in a consultant. I know how expensive that is, but again, if there are disconnects with executives and so forth, and you need some outside help, it's hard when you're inside to make those changes. Bring in an outside expertise. Secondly, conduct a penetration test. So why a pen test? Because you can see whether or not the alerts are being made to whatever your response organization, whether it's an MSSP, SOC, internally, or whatever it might be, and see how you can improve it. And one thing you might want to do is conduct a ransomware exercise. I say that because it's not only a major threat, but also it is something that will have to drive executive participation. And number two, it often means you do have to isolate systems in that process. Anything else, if any panelist wants to share a second on, I mean, like empowerment or anything, I'll take anything you guys want to say. Paul, you got something?
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in and just provide a little bit of context and information and more of a step back. Really, you have to get executive buy-in first and foremost. Having them participate in the incident management program is more when you're doing executive roundtables or workshops for those deeper use cases and the tabletop exercises. From conducting penetration tests, I don't necessarily think that executive would be, well, they wouldn't be participating in that, but I think that they would be more interested in the output of what was discovered, how their company is faring, and if there's any gaps or issues that were identified, how the company would or the resources would plan to mitigate or remediate that risk.
Yeah, I think those are very, very good points, and based on experience, appreciate that. Let me move on. Thank you, Paul, for interjecting here. Let's briefly talk about resources, and I just want to draw our attention to a key guidance that was provided by our members for people to consider, because budget and staffing and third-party support organizations, everyone understands the need for it, but it's how you kind of set this up. Obviously, you need financial resources. If you can try to have a direct allocated established budgets for this. Now, I mean, they're outside support organizations, obviously they have to participate, but at least to have a budget that isn't a part of something else that might potentially get cut. Try to set it up that way. And we talked about having contingent funds, if you have to recover from an incident, which isn't necessarily to say you're going to use them, but you have to communicate the fact that we might have to restore a number of workstations, and that's going to take time to do that, or whatever it might be. With staffing, again, depending on the size of your organization, having a set core dedicated staff is important, because they have to spend their time really coordinating tests and making sure that when the trigger is pulled, you're ready to go. And you can't be distracted by doing other things, equally. So include incident management responsibilities and support staff in their job descriptions and performance reviews as another way to engage support organizations to say, rather than just saying this is your job, and by the way, you're not going to get paid on it. Bring it into their job performance as much as you can. And third parties, what members have suggested for, like, we're not recommending it, but like Mandy, if you need some support or forensic supports, have contracts in place, put them on retainer, and then if funds aren't use them to help with tabletop exercises, doing a penetration test. You want to have the contracts in place. If you have a major incident and you don't have anything, and you need some help from the outside and you don't have anything set up, it's just going to delay your recoverability. Paul, you have something?
Yeah, I can add to this as well. With the third-party support organizations, years back, they were doing $0 retainers. So the goal was really just to get the contracts and all the paperwork in place, which was great because you don't want to be in the middle of an incident going through, agreements and reviews and delaying that process further. Fast forward years now, there are different tiers, and based on the dollar amount for the retainer, if you don't use it, you can basically use them for tabletop exercises. Now, if you're having a problem with your budget, and this is why in the prior slide I mentioned about getting the executive buy-in, if you're having difficulties with that, maybe you supplement the retainer fee for one of your pen tests hoping that you're not going to use that retainer and that supplements the penetration test. And the other comment I wanted to make was in regards to budget. Even though you have that retainer in place, you hope you don't want to use it. Try to, put a line item in your annual budget just for certain funds based on the different tier of hours that you get for your retainer. You have that additional bucket of money in case you need to utilize it. And going to your budget meetings, letting them know that that money is just more of a set aside and will be returned if it's not being used.
Exactly. Good points. Good points. I'm going to go through, since we're running toward the bottom of the hour, I'm going to go through the next few slides a little bit more quickly, but members can comment. And then I want to get right to the second tier, which is talking about incident response plan and playbooks. So I want to make sure we get to metrics at the end of this. As far as stakeholders, just briefly, they participate. Here's a list of stakeholders that most of you have involved to some level of degree. And we'll talk, they are generally organized into teams like core teams and so forth. What we say is make sure to identify all stakeholder organizations and document their roles and responsibilities in the program itself. You can use RACI charts to do that. The second thing is ensure that it's not just an organization, you have the name of someone behind that. So it isn't the organization that's showing up to the calls, it's the name of a person in that organization. And that organization, if they're changing personnel around, let you know that that's changed, because you don't want to start chasing people down in the middle of anything. Sounds basic, but I've seen it happen where people don't do it. And then I'm just going to point out, in the guidance document, we really lay out some of the responsibilities that these organizations typically have. And you can use that guidance as you're developing their RACI charts and responsibilities. The last part of the support side are support tools. And there are really 4 groups of these. And we talked about different ones. And in fact, members did say what they're using and the value of it. That's in the guidance document. We're not going to get into a lot of that today. It's notification, tracking, support for the response processes, and document repositories are generally the 4 categories. Pagers aren't really used. The services still are there. Maybe some people use it, but it's mainly cell phones, and pager duty really works with not just pages, but with cell phone. I need to bring that out because I use pagers, but they don't use them anymore. The other thing on the guidance side is make sure you have out-of-band capabilities for communications, maintain hard copies for your support organizations. Very important to do that, or SaaS repositories as well. Another thing that members have done is they've taken advantage of transcription features in Zoom and Teams. So when you're having technical calls, the results of those calls can be transcribed. One of the things we talked about is having certain scribes on your teams as well. We'll bring that up again. And as I mentioned, we do go into the different types of tools that are used and some guidance on tools that members use for members of the collaborative. I want to talk about incident response plan components and then get some other member guidance on this. So as far as some of the plan components go, event, incident definition, sources, and types. We'll talk about that. We had a lot of discussion around what the definition should be because there are legal considerations. And I'm going to ask my team to talk about that in a minute. Their response life cycle phases, and then their stakeholders response groups. Severity categories, postmortem reviews, and contacts lists. But I just want to point out the effectiveness and efficiency of your plan boils down to how you're categorizing severity of these things. If you don't do that and apply equal resources to all incidents, you're going to end up spinning your wheels. So that we'll talk a little bit about classification criteria, and then we'll talk also about process steps, which really are embodied in playbooks. And they'll call out stakeholders, there'll be communications, instructions in that, and there may even be SLAs for timeframes. So this is where I'd like a little help from the team. It used to be you could just use the word incident liberally, but you can't really do that anymore because of the discoverability of it. And the SEC proposed regulations kind of bring a lot of this into the fore, although there's a materiality aspect in defining that. We are suggesting you consult with your legal department on what's discoverable. And what companies are doing is that they're for high severity incidents, legal is brought in and is in all handling under attorney-client privilege. We're seeing that more and more. So there's a differentiation between high severity and other incidents that may not need to have them brought in, because what you do can be discoverable. Some are basing the definite incident on the magnitude of assets impacted. And again, we're saying don't call it incident, call it a finding, a validated threat, or an anomalous safe, which is an attempted access later proved valid. We do talk about groups of stakeholders that make up parts of things, and we do mention them in, not only mention them, we detail them in the guidance document, your core team, and who's typically a member of your, and then your CERT, your extended CERT, and then crisis management. And you can see it kind of extends, but you may have different response groups organized differently, but there are multiple functions in the business a part of that. In terms of the definition of event and incident, and it is described in the detailed guidance document, members finding you're using the word incident less and changing some of the names that you're using and nomenclature in your plans?
Just Corey, I can get us started if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've defined 3 criteria. So first and foremost, on the onset of an anomaly within an environment, it's defined as a finding, and that kind of like that last bullet point you have. And then from there, we kind of like progress into it being associated with a potential event. And this is where we're key in determining and distinguishing, like I am by no means a lawyer, but it's critical for us when we evaluate one or more events or anomalies within an environment to determine like what is the overall impact to the organization. And one key thing that we work closely with our privacy team and outside counsel is determining like, does this jeopardize or harm our application and or users? And that's kind of where we would then go under the discussion if we need to elevate it to an incident, because with the security proposals, or the SEC proposals, it's definitely very, very important for us to understand the language that we're using.
It is, and then you will have to, in your plan, talk about materiality from the context of what the SEC calls material to the value of the country in terms of a shareholder wanting to invest in you if you're a public company. It's going to get, I'd use the word worse, but you really need to bring in your legal teams. And as Corey said, define really what you want to call an event versus an incident, and what's a high severity incident versus others that you can kind of exclude from that. So thank you, Corey, for sharing those insights. So I just want to talk a little bit about severity categories, and what we're recommending is keeping the number of levels to 5 or fewer, because these are the ones that will drive your playbooks and what you're going to do involving legal, et cetera. If you have 10 of them, it's going to be more complicated. We have a number of criteria that members have used. One thing that members recommend here is go to the National Cyber Incident Scoring System from CISA. You can modify it. It has 9 things. Members brought it down to 6, but that's a good place to start. And what we put together here is, if you just want a very basic way to do it, here's kind of a quick method for classifying incidents. So you basically try to determine, what versus unauthorized access, disruptions, and information loss is 3 main categories. You can expand that, I understand. But whatever falls in which category, even if you have 1 tick mark, that's the level at which you'll want to do things. So it's a little bit of guidance for those who are struggling. But again, you can go into the CISA model, and many members kind of end up developing their own severity classes. And with that, the severity classes, this is where we develop our processes from. And in our discussions, moderate lows, set 3, 4, 5, you might have general playbooks. You could have specific ones for those. But the playbooks that you'll actually be concerned about developing, and these are procedures, but I'm going to explain a little bit about them because we talked a lot about this. The procedures, they can be around different processes, or they can be around key threats. In this case, we showed key threats like ransomware, malware, DOS. You don't want a lot of them, number one, but you want them to be useful in the middle, and you can determine the usefulness as you test them. And just to take an example here, and we talked about this, in terms of the playbook, members organize it around the NIST response categories of detection, containment, eradication, recovery, post-incident. And one of the biggest things that came out of this is keep the language short, use a checklist. And again, that checklist can bring in stakeholders, can talk about who's going to be, status communications. If there are SLAs in any of those categories, what they are and what we try to achieve. SOPs, one of the things that we talked about this is, and I think this, and I'll have members comment on this, is don't have your incident management team try to write all the procedures and then give them to everyone. You may have your end user support team that has an SOP for restoring laptops, and let them figure out the way to do that and run with with the way they do that. You reference that in the playbooks, which is a way to organize it. But if you're trying to write everything up, you're not even going to look at this stuff. Any comments, quick comments from members, and then I'll need to move on because I know I'm running a little bit behind.
I would just say, build your playbooks, test your playbooks, update your playbooks. Same thing goes for your overall incident response plan. It's a living document. Keep it updated. Absolutely.
Thank you, Corey, again for that. So quickly, I'd like to go through some of the guidance here for postmortems. Postmortems we talked about, you don't do this for all incidents, do it for the major ones. And they're going to involve what asset was compromised, what type of data was compromised, what was the extent, what was the root cause. We detail this in the guidance document. We'll talk about stakeholders, who's involved in the reviews, review venues, will it be in web, will it be on person, and reports. Members typically have a very detailed report, and the report documents control and process improvements. You want to make sure that whatever comes out of that goes into your security plan or your PMO, or however you're managing improvements to your program. And the reports will either be a detailed report for all members here, and then a summary for executive report. And a lot of members are now changing lessons learned to opportunities for improvement just because of the legal discovery issues behind this. I would just say we have to worry about those. Let legal worry about them, but you got to do your jobs too, and make sure that you do conduct postmortems. As far as the last is testing and training, I think Corey said it a lot. Once a year testing is really not enough. PCI and others require. Playbooks are often tested more frequently through tabletop exercises. That's what you need to do. And members often train by developing playbooks and then testing them. That can be a method, but they can take formal training through the Professional Development Academy or organizations like ISC2. Test your plan with relevant threats like ransomware and domain impersonation attacks. In other words, something that you're really executives are very concerned about, and they would be involved in. Make sure you do that as a priority. Engage third party to help conduct your tests, which will identify process improvements. Train your engineers on their responsibilities by having them review playbooks and SOPs. Engage executives in these tests to confirm their responsibilities and better understand their response actions that must be taken. And there are some interesting things we talked about in terms of these tests. There are some third-party platforms you should consider. One was SimSpace, we talked about, Safe Breach, and Simulate. SimSpace, it started out in the government, and it allows you to fully replicate your environment and test your controls and processes and workflows in the context of your environment. The problem with tests sometimes is there's a level of abstraction, but explore those is a way to make your tests more valid. And we started to talk about that, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit more. I'm going to get into metrics, and then we'll key takeaways, and then we'll be able to handle some of the Q&A questions on here. So as far as metrics and monitoring goes, here are some examples of some metrics, and they're in the presentation here, as well as the guidance document, that you would want to consider. And the way we looked at it is there's some monitoring informational metrics that you may want to turn into performance metrics, depending upon whether what you're finding is adverse or not. And then there's some performance objective metrics. In other words, improving the effectiveness and efficiency of your program. So as far as monitoring goes, you can monitor event incident volume by type, just to see sort of what you're facing. The second thing is costs, which is very, very difficult to monitor. It's a much more difficult metric to come by, but more and more companies, and we talked about this, are now trying to look at the costs of an incident to satisfy cyber insurance queries and needs, but also to make a case for why you want to have preventative and detective controls in place to prevent this from happening in the first place. So it's much more difficult to measure because you have to look at response time, recovery things, reputational things. But we're finding that organizations are now finding it worthwhile to move into that area. And then there are performance objective metrics, things that will make your plan more effective and efficient. So one is false positives to improve the tuning, monitoring tools and processes to reduce the time addressing false positives. We talked about that. So you can see whether or not you're tuning them and dealing with less of those. The second is support team responsiveness. If you're having members not coming to these calls on time, you ought to monitor and track it, set an objective, and make sure management's seeing that so that they do show up. So you could do that. And here's an example of what's in the security metrics workbook for a performance type of measure. What we do is describe the measure, what the objective is, what the progress is, and then we show a trend against that. And it's a very effective way for trying to achieve performance improvement. Another one is incident response SLAs to the various, to detection, to recovery. Again, it's more difficult because you have to track time. Some people are trying to do that in Workday, and you have to track it in your incident tracking system in terms of when you're into the next phase. So it's a little bit more work. Again, one of the best practices is if you have a search scribe or someone looking at this program, you can have a luxury beginning to see how to do that. And the last thing you want to do is track your postmortem actions progress. So out of postmortem, you're going to identify improvement to this to try to get better in your incident response process. And there may be some control deficiencies that you're going to try to mitigate out of that. So we'll summarize with some key takeaways, and then we will go into some of the Q&A questions here with members, and then complete with a poll. So one of the key takeaways is to make sure that effective and instant response processes, you understand they require more than just the response plan, but they're supported operationally by, let's see here. There we go. They're in the context of a framework. The second key takeaway is for executive support and involvement. They're absolutely key to responsiveness, especially in granting the response team the necessary powers to take decisive actions like temporary shutting down assets. You will do that in a ransomware event. You're going to be segmenting networks and isolating workstations, could be even the CEOs. But they have to know that you will do that, and you have to be empowered to do that. Limit the number of severity classes, playbooks, and texts, employing checklists where possible. I think it comes down when you actually do a test, you'll see whether or not members are going to actually use the playbooks or they're just going to go off script. And if they're going to go off script, you may be missing key parts. But if they're going off script, you've overly complicated things. So this is very, very important that you kind of tune your program around this, and that you do it well. And testing will help you do that, as Corey mentioned. Test more than annually using tabletops, as we mentioned. And again, retrain some third-party support organizations for their immediate support in the event of a severe incident. I want to open this up to members of the team. If you had some parting guidance in terms of what's most important for an effective program, and it can be these things, or you can emphasize that in your experience, or maybe there's something else we didn't cover here. Let's just hear from some of our panelists about what is really fundamentally important to making this work.
Hey, this is Michelle. I know for us, actually testing the playbooks and processes that we've put into place has been the key, because, during testing, we'll find things that look really good on paper, but they just don't work when we actually go to try to test them. Right.
So I hear you, and it takes time to do that. But thank you, Michelle, so the testing is extremely important, and Corey underscored that too. Who else? Panelists, what else do you have to say as far as parting guidance?
Kind of the piece. John in the Q&A, made an excellent comment, right, regarding our third-party vendors for IR retainers and so forth. Just to kind of chime on and make sure that before you sign any level of statement of work with an IR firm, that you engage with your cyber insurance provider to ensure that that IR retainer firm can and will be supported by them. In addition, there is sometimes the cybersecurity insurance providers already have partnerships with key IR retainers, and they usually have kind of a substantial discount for their hourly rate.
That's a very, very good point. Thank you for making that too, John. Thanks, Corey. Anyone else before we move on? Okay. We won't get into these now since we're approaching the top of the hour, and I do want to get to a few more questions and talk a little bit about the task force. I just want to say that our guidance document does talk a little bit about, answers to these frequently asked questions, and they did come up in our task force meeting, but they didn't fall in directly into our discussion this afternoon. I won't tip it off and everything. Is there an ideal way to organize your incident management program? I don't think there's an ideal way. Members are doing it in a number of different ways, and we get more to that when we get into the guidance document. Frameworks, NIST, MITRE are used. Improving MSSP's effectiveness. A lot is the relationship management and getting them involved in the tuning and analysis of events and improving that. And law enforcement, we talk about that more specifically. I would establish a relationship with law enforcement right up front, the FBI and so forth. They're always willing to help. They have forensic expertise that they can provide. And if you need to engage them, they'll be there to help you. So I'm just we're gonna go right to a couple of the questions that Patrick and Michael had. And I thank my panelists for answering some questions as I was talking. I just want members to know that we have a number, and actually prospective members too as well. We've completed several task forces this year. We're doing now security monitoring SOC SIM task force, and we've just begun an application security task force. We're planning to talk about identity and access management, really delve into security metrics. We've already kind of begun that, but we're going to actually have members talk about that and come up with a catalog and some tool that members can use at the end of this. And we'll talk about privacy and data regionalization. I won't get into all the content additions, but they are outputs from all our major task forces and some of our board meetings. And we've talked about Log4j, and we've talked about the SEC proposed cybersecurity rules. As I said, I'm asking my team to share that with prospective members. If you, at the end of this, I'll show you how to get in contact with us, and they'll send that to you. And of course, what we've come out of this particular program. So we're building our content library. It's available to all members, and we want you to join, not just for this, but to participate on these teams and see the value you get from interacting with peers. So with that, people are taking the poll questions. Let me just kind of read this from Patrick. As cybersecurity continues to be a serious concern being elevated in all organizations, is there an approach that elevates GRC and digital risk to the senior board members and C-suite? It appears to be more of a risk mitigation organization-wide issue than a siloed cyber issue in the IT department. Is this a risk culture perspective? That's a tough question. Let's see if is there an approach that elevates GRC and digital risk to the senior board members and the C-suite? It's certainly from the board member side, those risk issues are being asked. And of the CISO, and the question is, certainly risk management organizations are participating. And is it a risk culture perspective? I think the culture of risk is now being more pervasive among all organizations. The question is coming to common definitions of it. And I'm just giving you what I'm seeing in some of the other task forces and talking to CISOs. Anyone have any thoughts on this one? It's a very good question, Patrick.
I mean, risk is, I think, by far being captured by senior board members and C-suites more and more. Over the last couple of years, it's definitely been it's been exponential for the awareness. I would just say that, for us, we've developed committees that actually have our C-suite executives present, where we have, monthly, quarterly meetings with them, disclosing risks, discussing risks, and so forth, to determine what is the best approach for us to take going forward.
Right, I agree with that. I realize there are a number of other questions too. Another one was on the role of public, and we have about 4 more minutes. I'll do the best I can to get to these. The role public-private partnerships like InfraGard can potentially play in developing best practices and effective incident management. I will say that, and again, like this organization, InfraGard, some of the ISACs can be very, very beneficial in helping share some of the best practices. The ISACs have been good in sharing threat intelligence. I haven't been involved with this much, but like InfraGard and the ISACs, which may be industry specific, you're with peers and you're in an organized setting where you can share some of these things. I can only say that you should belong to these organizations, and you will get the benefit often of that. And I've seen stuff out of InfraGard that really delves on this topic really well. So I'll just quickly answer that. How does incident response and management line or respond to DR, BCP, and BIA? The way, we're going to have a team on that. The way we looked at it is when you got to crisis management, you'd have a trigger for getting into business continuity and DR. But that's kind of a handoff. I think what you're saying is how do you align this to the planning? I think some of the incident response tests should go into the crisis management tests. It's very, and in business continuity. They're often done independently. I believe more of that's going to be, pulled together, in terms of testing. And I bet regulators are going to say, start doing that just in terms of the trend. Now, maybe I'm going to be wrong in the next couple of years, but we didn't talk a lot about BCP and the business impact analysis. We'll probably have a team in business continuity at the end of this year, early next year. So it's a very, very good question. That was a comment on third parties. I think we just have time for let me see what else we have here. That was John, we've answered that. How do you deal with management that only sees incident response planning is just a checklist development? I consider a journey. George, you're right. George just gave us that. It is a, his thing is just like cybersecurity is a journey, but this is a journey, and it's a journey of different topographies and involvement. I would agree with that. I think they'll see it as a checklist if they're not directly engaged on its benefit and in some tests in terms of bringing them in their involvement. Now, maybe members have had better luck. Maybe they have management that just all of a sudden agrees with this. But you can go into an organization and, yeah, we've got it here. People have a 5-page plan and they've never really executed it. I hate to say I've seen that. And if you're looking to be evaluated in a third-party process, it's not a good thing to have. Corey was addressing this too.
Yeah, just one extra piece, right, is performing an external tabletop exercise and getting those stakeholders involved in the exercise itself can really open their eyes for what could be the business impact.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. We got a compliment from Stan, who's a professor in higher education teaching cybersecurity. Stan, maybe we'll have you come here and share some of that great knowledge, I'm sure. Is there simple, effective tools that one can use to introduce incident management in an approachable way? Like, are there dashboards or otherwise that someone can suggest that would help to demonstrate the activity? Yeah, it's coming back to fundamentals. I mean, we have a framework. I know it can seem complicated, and for those who are in this game more, but I don't, we've got piece parts and everything, and I'm not aware of something that is available. It doesn't mean that it is, but if you can help us with that, give me a call. Not to punt. It's a very, very good question. Again, education. Board members are becoming more sophisticated over this. They're having members of cybersecurity expertise, so they're more aware of this piece of it. And let me just say too, and that goes to our board thing, and I'm going to have to stop in a minute. The questions boards are asking is, okay, I allocate X amount of 5-year budget. How much are you spending on incident management response? They now want to know that you're spending money on this and the activities around it. So they're becoming more savvy. But is there something that could help someone that isn't? I think it's a great need, quite honestly. I think we're kind of over time here. Thank you very much for all the responses and for everyone being here and sharing the time today. We wish you all well for the week. Please reach out, members of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, obviously anytime for help and assistance, and those interested in joining. Let me just kind of, hopefully you've said it. There's it's membership at cyberleadersunite.com. Sounds a little bit long, but I'll leave this up here in the end. Please contact us. And, in the chat box, you can do that as well. We're looking forward to talking with you. Thanks again to all, for the executive sponsor, Nicole, and great team members and hosts today. Thank you, and panelists. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye now.